Well, good afternoon. It's Senator Malcolm Roberts in Brisbane, and thanks for joining me this Friday afternoon. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So send your comments in the comment section, or your questions for later in the comment section below, and I'll be coming back after my presentation to address the answers in the second half of the show. So if you've got a question, send it in the comments now, and I'll try to answer it later. The topics I'd like to discuss today, let's start with Lydia Thorpe, but I'm not going to talk about her in the way you might think. I don't want to talk about it too long, but I've got to mention it. Not so much for Lydia, because, well, her actions stand by themselves. I just want to point out something. There was a video of her abusing people in front of a strip club, calling white people racist slurs, abusing them. I just want to point out this. How different the media reaction would have been if it was me, a white man from one nation, and the roles were swapped. I'd probably be up on criminal charges. This differential treatment is what's at the core of The Voice. Martin Luther King, the famous black activist, black preacher in America, African American, said he had a dream. You've probably heard of it. He dreamt, as he said, that his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Martin Luther King said those marvelous words. He dreamt that his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. We're heading in Australia, under The Voice if it succeeds, to an Australia where each of us is judged as less because our skin is white. We must oppose this terrorist ideology at all costs. Vote no to The Voice. It's a racist attempt to control people, and I'll talk more about it in future, but I'll move on to other topics for now. But we do notice that the support for The Voice is dwindling, and I'll tell you why I think that's the case. People are starting to hear about it and realize that it is a real crock. Not only that, they're realizing that it is race-based legislation or change to the Constitution that makes it racist. We don't want racism instilled in our Constitution. And the third thing, and I think probably the biggest, is people are saying, why is the Labor Party in federal power, federal government, withholding details from us? Why are they not going to put the wording of the changes to the Constitution on the ballot paper? Why are they not telling us what's going on? Why are they being so secretive? These are the whys. We must ask why. People are starting to see the intimidation, the bullying from the Yes campaign and the cover-up. And people are starting to see the deceit. And Aussies don't like deceit. Well, let's go to North Queensland now, where we've had some really good news. We've had a win, actually. We the people, not me, but we the people have had a win in far North Queensland. The Cairns Council, Cairns is a large city in North Queensland, has backed down on their proposed cash ban. The council was going to insist that cashless facilities would be at all their facilities. There would be no more cash transactions. So if you wanted to pay the Cairns Council something, you had to pay it in electronically, not cash. Well, the people, the residents of Cairns stood up to their councillors and said, no way. And they held up. And it's just like the way my office and I worked to stop the cash ban bill in federal parliament, in the previous federal parliament under Scott Morrison and Barnaby Joyce. Even though it passed the lower house, the House of Representatives, before it came to the Senate, we got the bill smashed and out of the Senate because we didn't even bring it into the Senate for a vote. It went straight to committee because what we did was unite the grassroots members of all parties and the crossbench senators, and we got people writing to their representatives, requesting meetings, making their voice heard. And the feeling was so strongly and overwhelmingly negative towards the Labor Party and Liberal Party cash ban bill that the Labor Party and Liberal Party and National Party consigned it to a committee, and it just festered there. And then I moved a motion a few months later and said, let's get rid of it altogether. And they said, phew, that's good. So with all that pressure from the people, we got the cash ban bill binned. So the people have the power. They can put the pressure on politicians and get this kind of result. Cairns has demonstrated it. We demonstrated it at federal level. This is just another example of the results that we can all get when we properly utilize people power, respectfully and strongly and with determination. But I want to add another point. Who pays my salary? Who pays councillors' salary? Who pays the Prime Minister's salary? The taxpayers pay them. The taxpayers pay all of us. We serve the people of Australia. We serve the people of Australia. Doesn't matter if you're a councillor in Cairns, doesn't matter if you're the Prime Minister, doesn't matter if you're a federal bureaucrat, doesn't matter if you're a senator or a member of the House of Representatives. We are paid by the taxpayers. We are elected to be representatives of the people. We are elected to serve the people of Australia. And that's something we must drive home repeatedly. I opened my first speech in the Senate on September 2016 with those words, as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia. And every major speech that's more than 2 or 3 minutes long where I've got time, I just say, as a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia. Speaking of servants, the Reserve Bank of Australia, taxpayers pay them. They are servants to the people of Australia as well. Now I'll come to that in a minute, we saw some big news about a proposed shake-up of the RBA. So I still need to see the detail on that and what the proposed changes will be. But they got almost everything wrong in the pandemic. Well, no, it's not a pandemic, is it? They got almost everything wrong, the Reserve Bank, during the virus mismanagement. 3 years of virus mismanagement. They got every forecast of inflation wrong. They did so many other things that were wrong. If we go back to the time when I entered the Senate in September 2016, we had a request from the various committees for nominations as to we wanted to attend Senate estimates, which agencies. So I put down the Reserve Bank of Australia, and I was told by the committee chair, you can't have the Reserve Bank of Australia. I said, why not? Well, they just don't come to Senate estimates. Why not? They just don't come. Why not? They just don't come. And I said, well, who pays their wages? Taxpayers. I want them. So the committee chair went away. She came back later and said, after consulting with people higher up in the Liberal National Party government at the time, she said, well, you've got a choice. You can either have them in camera immediately, within the next week or so, or you can have them in 6 months' time in Senate estimates after these current Senate estimates. And I said, well, let's strike while the iron's hot. I'll have them in camera. And we asked some fairly simple questions, but from then on, they attended every Senate estimate session. Every session. And they've been held accountable by the senators. In addition, when I left the Senate due to dual citizenship, and by the way, I was the only one who wasn't a dual citizen, but I hadn't done it technically correctly by the time of nomination, so the High Court deemed me ineligible too. So when I came back in 2019, I noticed the Reserve Bank of Australia was not on the list of agencies for Senate estimates. So I challenged Matthias Cormann in public in the Senate estimates hearing, and we had a little bit of an exchange, and they were at the next Senate estimates hearing, and they've been at every Senate estimates hearing since. So I was the senator that ensured that the servants to the people at the Reserve Bank of Australia get called to Senate estimates to be held accountable. Now, they admitted that they printed, or rather they created, electronic journal entries for over $600 billion during the COVID mismanagement, the 3 years of COVID mismanagement. I told them that this was going to lead to inflation, and they laughed. Hello, look what we've got around us. I told the similar session to the Treasury Secretary of the Treasury back in 2016, my first session in Senate estimates, in October of 2016 it would have been, why they were printing so much money at that time. Why were they doing quantitative easing? And they said, well, we don't use M3 anymore as a money measurement. They in fact do. But they just pretty much dismissed me, almost with ridicule. And then the second Senate estimates, which would have been February the next year, I asked similar questions about the money supply. And John Fraser, I think his name was, the Secretary of the Treasury, said, well, this is something we've been wondering about as well. So it's gone from being a pariah. I've gone from being a pariah to being actually, having something sensible to say. Then the next Senate estimates, I asked similar questions, and he said, well, it's actually been very puzzling. We've been wondering why as well, but it seems to be happening. So this is the kind of level of thinking that goes into the Treasury sometimes. And I'll talk more about that later. But it's very important that senators and members of the House of Representatives, every elected official, works on behalf of the people to hold the public servants accountable, because it's your wages, your taxes rather, that pay these people's wages. Look what we've seen over the last 12 months in terms of inflation. Look what we've seen in terms of the forecasts of inflation that have been completely wrong. For 12 months, the Reserve Bank has been trying to crash the economy and send everyone broke to fix the inflation problem they caused by printing money. If you think about it and you look at each issue that keeps recurring in this country, or that keeps arising in this country, every single major problem in Australia is due to federal government. Every one of them. I'm not talking about Albanese's Labor government right now, not just the Morrison LNP government, Morrison Joyce, Littleproud LNP government. I'm talking about federal government has created every problem in this country. Directly or indirectly, every problem. The problem is governance. Now let's look at a manifestation of that mess. Liddell Power Station. I've worked in the Hunter Valley. I've worked in central Queensland. I've worked in North Queensland in the coalfields. I've worked around the Ipswich area when they had coalfields. I've worked in the Western District of New South Wales and in their coal mines. And I've been very close to and travelled past Liddell Power Station. Liddell Power Station was Australia's largest coal-fired power station. It'll be shut down this week. And that'll be over 1,200 megawatts of reliable, dispatchable power. Yes, John Harrison, I see your comment. Love your picture, by the way. We will have mass blackouts soon. Yeah, we will be. But 1,200 megawatts of reliable, dispatchable power. About 10% of all of New South Wales' power being switched off. Can you see the domino effect here? The South Australians were the first to go crazy on this and try and replace. They blew up their power station and their coal-fired power station and celebrated that. That's an act of terrorism. They became dependent on a long cable that's coming over from Victoria to South Australia. So they became dependent on another state. Their costs of electricity rose dramatically. Their reliability fell apart. Then Victoria started to blow up its power stations, dismantle its power stations. I mean, that's an act of insanity. And now they're becoming more dependent on solar and wind, unreliable solar and wind. They've also got an interconnector to Tasmania. And we go into some of the details there later. Now we've got New South Wales shutting off its power stations. And now they're talking about the massive power station at Araring being shut down earlier than expected, before its life has ended. Before its scheduled life has ended. Now we've got the lunatics in Queensland saying that they want to shut down power stations as well. But then they suddenly start seeing that the new Labor government in New South Wales realises this could be a mess and they'll be held responsible for it. So they're now talking about using gas. When you burn gas, it's no different from burning coal. Gas, coal and oil are all hydrocarbons. They consist of basically of atoms of hydrogen and carbon. And when you burn them, you get H2O, which is water vapor, and you get CO2, which is carbon dioxide. So gas produces carbon dioxide as well. See what they're doing? They're crazy, but they're starting to realize that this is going to cost them a lot of problems. And they're not worried about our jobs. They're not worried about people's jobs in the Hunter Valley, people's jobs in central Queensland. They're not worried about people's jobs in the manufacturing. They're worried about their job. Because the people are starting to get very upset with high power prices. We went from being the lowest electricity prices in the world due to the fact that we relied upon cheap, affordable coal. We now have amongst the highest electricity prices in the world. So what's the solution these geniuses are doing in regard to losing 1,200 megawatts of reliable, consistent power? They're going to talk about having gas. And they're going to install a 500 megawatt battery that doesn't even create power. You lose more than you get out of it when you charge the damn thing. our power bills are going to keep going up and up and up. And batteries, they don't make them big enough to be able to compensate for the feed that we need if we lose our power due to a day without sunshine, a day without wind. This is insane. This was all forecast 20 years ago. We told them this would happen, and they're now starting to come to it. So our power bills are going to keep going up because the price of batteries is astronomical, and they don't store much power. So our power bills are going to keep going up for nothing. Wind, solar, climate change, all a scam to take money out of Australians' pockets and transfer it to the bank accounts of predatory billionaires. It's around the world. It's happening in the Western world. China produces 4.5 billion tons of coal a year. Billion tons. That's 4,500 million tons of coal a year. They're heading, they tell us, for 5 billion tons of coal a year. Australia produces 500 million tons. 1/9 of what China is now producing, 1/10 of what it will be producing. And they want our coal. We're the second biggest exporters of coal. They want our coal to add further imports to boost their own coal stocks in their country. China doesn't export much coal because it wants all the coal it can get. So when you're buying a manufactured product and it comes from China, and I say this particularly to the Greens, you're depending on coal. If you buy a Chinese car, a Chinese shoe, Chinese wind turbine, Chinese solar panel, you're buying an Australian coal product or a Chinese coal product. And the Chinese produce 9 times the coal that we produce, and they want to go to 10 times. Rubbish. Complete rubbish. Remove all the subsidies, stop demonising coal, put nuclear on the table, and let every one of the various sources of electricity compete so that we can have the cheapest power available. The whole reason why our power prices have gone from the cheapest electricity in the world to the most expensive are due to this scam. And who pays? The people. We the people pay. I'd like to introduce another topic because I want to introduce a book. It's a wonderful book. It's like me, short and simple. Sub-Imperial Power by the author is Clinton Fernandez. I had the pleasure of, he sent me this book. He sent it to many other senators as well, apparently, and members of various committees in the House of Representatives as well. And he told me that I'm the only one who's read it and got back to him on it. I complimented him on his book. It's such a good book, Sub-Imperial Power by Clinton Fernandez. It's such a good book that I felt compelled to not only thank him for giving me the book, but to share my insights with him and share a couple of criticisms as well, or questions it raised. I believe in being honest. So he raises a very controversial topic. This man was born in Goa, which is near Mumbai in Western India, and he's a very bright man, but he's also got a ton of guts and integrity because he's a lecturer at the Australian Defence Force Academy, ADFA, in Canberra. He's a lecturer at the University of New South Wales Canberra campus. And as I said, he's very bright. He's stitched together a really good book. He basically says that we have lost our sovereignty to the United States. I mean, I knew that. Many people watching here would know that. But he said we also do the United States' dirty work in many ways as a sub-imperial power. Now, the British took our sovereignty away from us, and the Americans followed when they became number one in the world, and the United Nations has been working to try and remove what's left of our sovereignty. So this book puts it all out in the open, raises some really serious questions, and I thoroughly recommend it. I don't know what your background is, what you've read, so I rarely recommend books because I don't know the people's backgrounds and needs. But let's move on. This is a list of treaties, multilateral, bilateral treaties that Australia has signed. It was obtained by a friend, And he got them, before he knew me, he got them around about the late 1990s, I think. And mid to late 1990s, he's been through them, and he found a list of 7,000 treaties, more than 7,000 treaties that our governments have signed and that in some ways affect our sovereignty. More than 7,000 in the 1990s. Who knows how many that number is now. He couldn't get it through channels, normal channels, so he got it through other channels. But let's just say that I owe John an enormous debt for finding these and showing the proof that we are governed by more than 7,000 treaties. Many of them UN treaties. And that's not including the policies and legislation that came from the United Nations and their alliance partners in 2018. Since 2018, they've been in alliance with the World Economic Forum that have led to more legislation in this country. All of these treaties, maybe with a couple of exceptions, require legislation through Parliament before they're enforced in this country. That's what Parliament's doing in this country, ceding our sovereignty. Clinton Fernandez, 7,000 treaties here. On Wednesday, I had the pleasure, my goodness, time flies, it's almost 25 minutes. On Wednesday, I had the pleasure of speaking to a group of around about 300 or more people at Nerang. And thank you so much for filling up the session, filling up the church at Nerang. And I really enjoyed it, and I thank people for their support. And I thank Sandy who organised it, and for everyone who turned up. I also want to thank William Bay, former Dr. William Bay, or I should say suspended Dr. William Bay. It's illegal for me to call him a doctor because APRA is going after him. They've suspended him. Now he's got them in the High Court, so I wish him well. He spoke brilliantly. Not a single note did he use, not a single bit of paper. He spoke with personality, with precision, with confidence, a really personable, engaging contact with the audience. And he did a hell of a good job. I also want to acknowledge the pain that's still here in our communities. I asked people during my presentation how many were still under injection mandates. A surprisingly large number still put their hands up. Can't believe it. These things have not been tested. They've been shown to be killers indiscriminately, not consistently, but indiscriminately, and we're still mandating them. It's crazy. It's inhuman. If someone wants it, fine, but never compel. And now that it's all but finished, why are we still compelling people? Because that shows clearly it's not about health. But in my presentation on the Gold Coast at Nerang, I discussed some of the global initiatives that are traceable to the United Nations World Economic Forum Alliance. Our children being mutilated by gender bending, and many other topics I discussed with children, underpinned by the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. Our health, COVID based on lies, health system smashed. And I went on discuss some of the details there. That's based upon the United Nations World Economic Forum. The failure to put medicinal cannabis within easy reach of the people of Australia is a blot on the TGA and on health departments for many, many years. Pauline and I have worked very hard on that, and we will continue to do so until we get it in everyone's hands, everyone who wants its hands. Thirdly, our families. Family law, that came from the United Nations in 1975. That's been the slaughterhouse of the nation, as my friends tell me. And we all know stories of people who've been dealt savage blows by that. Led to many suicides in this country. Look at our economic lifeblood, energy. I've already just talked about Liddell. The primacy of our energy supply is, well, it's primary. And it's very important for competitive advantage. And yet, under UN, World Economic Forum policies that are now being legislated in this country, just like these atrocities, we see the UN smashing our electricity sector, smashing our competitiveness. And who pays? We the people pay, as always, for these stupid government policies. Next, look at science. Science has given us the ability to communicate like this. Science has given us these things, which have given us enormous freedom, and potentially, in the future, if they end up in government control, potential really serious problems. Like a lot of technology, it can be misused. So it's up to us to make sure it continues to be used properly. But look how much these things now help us, make us more productive, and save us money. They're just enormous. That's come because of science. Science that's explored minerals, science that's explored the way electrons work, science that has explored the way the world works. And so much of the information is not even, that comes through these, is not even connected to these as such physically. Yet we can learn so much about our society through these things, and our world through these things. That science gave us freedom, because prior to science, the advent of the scientific method, the person who won an argument was the biggest bully, the strongest bully, physically strongest bully, religious, the strongest financial power. People were largely in ignorance. When this came up, when science arose, when the scientific method arose, people were suddenly free, because they now had the means of arguing a case. And instead of the biggest, the most powerful, the biggest liar winning and controlling everyone, it ended up being the person with the best argument, the best science. Well, nowadays science has been distorted, but that has been corrupted by the United Nations through the climate change body they created, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was developed basically by a crook, Maurice Strong. I won't talk about him again, but I'm going to keep reminding people of his name. He's one of the mass murderers of our human civilization in the last 100 years. He's responsible. His policies through the United Nations Economic Program are responsible for the deaths of 40 to 50 million people. He was a crook who formed the Chicago Climate Exchange for trading carbon dioxide credits that were made possible by legislation, safeguard legislation, that was brought in by Malcolm Turnbull and Greg Hunt in 2015. Yes, that's right, the Liberal Nationals. And rebooted strongly, put on steroids just last September by the Bowen Albanese gang in cahoots with the Greens. So they're destroying science, and they're rebranding carbon dioxide, which is essential to all life on the planet, as a pollutant. Our economy, tax system favours multinationals. It drives counterproductive and destructive behaviours. And multinationals get away with paying no tax, no company tax. And who pays? Taxpayers, small businesses in Australia. Life itself being smashed by abortion policies that have come from the United Nations. And childhood mutilation, which we just touched on a little while ago. And they're destroying accountability. They're now calling pedophiles, not calling them pedophiles, they're calling them minor attracted. Minor attracted. See, they're trying to legitimize these things. And these are things that we have been raising time and time again, and it's coming true. So what we've got to do is keep up the pressure. So look at all these things, and then we think about food. Our own food. Lab meat. In vitro meat. Fake meat. Bugs. They're painting farmers now as villains. Bill Gates came over here recently and had a meeting with Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister. And the statement was released by the Prime Minister saying that he had a chat with Bill Gates about climate, about food, agriculture, health, and energy. 5 topics. Bill Gates has got no qualifications in any of those. And he's got huge conflicts of interest in all 5. Just be a globalist billionaire, and you can get an audience with the Prime Minister to put in place more of your policies. So they're just some of the things that we see happening as a result deep down in our governments in this country, mainly federal but also state, that erode Australians' ways of life. Let's move on to something very positive before we open up to questions. I had a delightful day on Wednesday. In the morning, I addressed a group. I'd been invited to address a group at Runaway Bay on the Gold Coast, and then afterwards went up to a meeting with the management of sea transport. And I'll be telling you more about that in future. But highly successful. They have got some wonderful concepts, proven concepts. They've actually put them into practice in Queensland, in Northern Territory, and also in Western Australia, with regard to improving shipping dramatically and reducing costs of port costs for farmers, for mineral producers, for manufacturers. And I'll talk more about that in the future. With any luck, I'll be able to get the founder of the company and the chief of the company into a podcast, and we'll explain it all. It's really striking. I took a young assistant parliamentary advisor with me. He and I, as soon as we started listening to these people talk up in their offices as Sea Transport, we just looked at each other and were just stunned. We were just beaming with our smiles because we could see the power for this in Australia, and especially in Queensland, because Queensland is the most decentralised state in the country. So I'll talk more about that. But yesterday, I had a delightful lunch with some of the Taiwanese business leaders in Sunnybank. And, you know, we celebrate people in Mount Isa, communities in Mount Isa, for example, communities in Cairns, communities at Cohen, communities at Kowanyama, communities at Longreach, communities at Stanthorpe. And we should celebrate them. This community, the Taiwanese community in southeast Queensland, is a really solid, hard-working group of Australians. They're very much settled into the country. They've settled in. There's not much else I can say. They've assimilated, they've integrated, and they're marvellous people. They're hard-working, they're honest, and they're industrious. And they have strong connections in many fields. One of the major exporters of Australian produce, I was sitting down with him just yesterday. He's a Taiwanese. He's been here for 30 years. Contributed marvellously to our country, created jobs in our country, created trade in our country, created commerce in our country. So I want to acknowledge the Taiwanese people, their industriousness, their integrity, and their dedication, and their commitment to Australia, commitment to our country. So thank you so much. And just one thing before I go into questions. Labels are the refuge of the ignorant or the dishonest. I saw that just recently. Labels are the refuge of the ignorant. So if people don't know something, instead of showing that by not being able to argue back, they just call out a label. Call you a racist, they call you a homophobe, they call you a transphobe, they call you a Nazi, they call you a climate denier, they call you a conspiracy theorist. All of those are labels, and they're used by the ignorant or the dishonest wanting refuge, somewhere to hide. So that's the end of my summary for the week, or the comments for the week. So I'm open to now questions. Germany shut down nuclear power, went back to coal, says Shane. Yeah, that's correct. Not only did they shut down nuclear power, it's insane shutting down nuclear power. It's the safest form of power there is. But not only did they shut down nuclear, they shut down a few wind turbines to extend a coal-fired power station's life so they could keep mining coal. And so, you know, that shows the insanity that's going on. They became dependent upon Russian gas. And whatever you see the merits of Russian gas, the point is that they're talking about UN policies of solar and wind, but they're actually relying upon gas, which is a hydrocarbon, which is hydrocarbon, coal, oil and gas. And they also now bringing back coal. Italy's talking about, Italy I think is building a coal-fired power station. China's building heaps of them, one every 2 weeks I think it is, or maybe I might have that wrong, maybe one every week. But they're building hundreds of coal-fired power stations. India, that's right, yesterday in India I heard on the radio, this morning I heard on the radio coming into town that India is now the world's most populous country. They're building many new coal-fired power stations. So it's only us who are shutting it down. Yeah, Leanne Taylor says, I think we have the highest prices for everything, rates, water, electricity. Well, I haven't done a study, so I can't say, but I know we have the highest price, among the highest prices for electricity. I don't know the rates compared with other countries. It varies because in the United States, local council have more authority than they do here. Water, we've got very high water prices, needlessly high water prices, and what's more, in the in the Murray-Darling Basin and in other areas, people overseas, superannuation funds from overseas, Canada, New York, actually own some of the water entitlements in this country. I don't know what the hell that's got to do with it, but they should not be foreigners owning our water here and depriving farmers, holding on to water to drive the price of water up. So that's something we need to be fixing. You know, the Water Act of 2007 that came in when John Howard was Prime Minister, when Malcolm Turnbull was the Minister for the Environment and Water, they brought in the Water Act, and they said that there are 8 or 9 aims, I think maybe 10 aims that they specified in the legislation for the Water Act, and they repeated those aims 4 or 5 times in the legislation. And one of those aims is to ensure compliance with international commitments. What the hell is that doing in our legislation? That should not be the case. We should not be complying we should not even be making agreements with foreigners with regard to our use of our water, let alone selling it to overseas people. When can we have... Oh, Stephanie, I'm so pleased to hear you say this. Stephanie Heath says, when can we have an Oz exit from the WHO and the UN? Once enough voters put enough pressure on Liberal Labor. I first coined the term Oz exit in my first speech in the Senate in 2016, September 2016. So it goes back that far. And we coined the term Oz exit because Brexit had just gone through successfully, remember that? And so we want to get out of the UN. Oz exit is for Australia to leave the UN, and we need to get out of the World Health Organization, which is a crooked, corrupt, incompetent, dishonest, deceitful entity. It's killing people. And they don't care about people. They're not caring about health. What they want to do is control. So when can we have an Oz exit? As soon as the people take responsibility for electing members of parliament who will do their job. That's when we can get out of the UN. Just because Malcolm Roberts says we need to get out of the UN and Pauline Hanson says we need to get out of the UN does not mean that we can get out of the UN. If we're in a democracy, we need to have enough people aware of what the UN is costing in terms of lives and also money, and destruction of our environment, so that people awaken. So that's when we can have an Oz exit, when you get more and more people awake. How do we put... 5 dogs, thanks for the question. How do we put that pressure on the government to leave the United Nations then? Well, the first thing is the ballot box. Don't vote for Liberal Labor and Nationals and Greens. They're the ones who put us into this mess. They're the ones who are still signing our country away. They're the ones who will ultimately have the power of whether or not we sign the UN, World Health Organization's international health regulations to take over our country's health management and the UN's World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. It'll all depend on them. So what you need to do, secondly, is make sure you hold your representatives accountable. Senators, in each state, there are 12 senators. In the Northern Territory, in the ACT, there are 2 senators. Contact the senators. Don't just contact them. Walk up to their offices, visit them, and say, "I want to talk with him. I want an audience with the senator." And if you can't get an audience, and don't just give up at the first chance, the first attempt, keep trying. Telephone, demand to speak to them. Write letters, not emails, because they just ignore emails. Just write a letter that's paper letter and post it through Australia Post. Do the same with your House of Representatives member, and do exactly the same and say that he represents you, he or she represents you. Get them to do the same thing. They're working for you. So put the pressure on them. They will only do what you expect them to do if you tell them what you expect. And if you give them consequences, tell them you won't vote for them again. That's how you put pressure on them. You also put pressure on them through getting your relatives, your friends, your families, your workmates, social colleagues, your churchgoers. Get them to do the same and educate them. Start reading things like this. As I said, it's a lovely book, short and simple like me. So get people to understand, get them to learn, so people are educated, and then they can inform the politicians. It's a funny thing with Australians. They say Australians are against authority. Well, they are until the crap hits the fan, and then they all run to authority. That's what's surprising. So we know that politicians can't be trusted. Don't run to them and just do whatever they say. Hold them accountable. Exercise your job. We've talked about the Constitution in the past. The supreme governing entity of our country is the Constitution. That's at the top of our country. We have a constitutional monarchy, not a monarchy. We have a constitutional monarchy, which is effectively a republic. We already are a republic, because a monarchy is where a king or a queen reigns over people, controls people. Under a constitutional monarchy, the monarch serves the Constitution, and that's exactly what's happened. So what we need to do is remember that we, the people, are the boss of this country, because only we can change the Constitution. And I'll say it again, Australia is the only country in the world in which the people voted for the Constitution. The only one where the people had a vote. And it's only the people who can change the Constitution. We are the bosses in this country, and we've got to make sure that the politicians understand that. Are the globalists afraid of the people? Well, I think they are. I'm absolutely convinced they are, because they're so into control. And always beneath control, there is fear. People who try to control, whether they be parents, whether they be bosses, whether they be union bosses, whether they be directors, members of the church, people who try to control, always beneath control there is fear. Now, what are the globalists afraid of? Well, in the old days, the globalists were afraid of you knowing that they control the money, they control the land, they control the resources, they control access to what people can do and can't do. They controlled everything about a person's life. That was under feudalism. Then with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we created, a large middle class was created, and people suddenly had choices as to what they could do with their time and their money. And now we've got the globalists realizing they're losing control, especially with these things. And so and especially with the middle class being wealthy enough to be able to choose to how they spend their money and how they spend their time and what they do. And so they want control back. And so what we're seeing is these things trying to be used as control. We're seeing so many other, even our health system being used as control, our education system. But the other thing about control is that in the old days, if I held a gun to your head, you knew that I was controlling you. You knew you were under control. But if I indoctrinated you from when you were just a tiny pup, 4 years of age, and entered preschool, if I controlled you through preschool, through school, through primary school, through secondary school, through university, through your trades courses, then you didn't even know you were being controlled. And that's what we're facing right now. This book sheds light on some of that control, how we've lost our sovereignty. So what we need to do is to wake up, because how can we? What we must do is work out that these globalists, to answer your question, they are afraid of us, and they're most afraid of us knowing what's going on. And slowly, bit by bit, and it's getting faster thanks to COVID mismanagement, we have got more and more people waking up. Jen asks, how can we stop immigration? Australia's full. Again, put the pressure on the members of Parliament and the Senate. Pauline and I have been calling out for this for years. Pauline's been calling out for it for decades. Not only the quantity of immigration, but the quality of immigration. We want people, just talk about quality for a minute. Quality, we want people who will comply with our laws, people who will assimilate into our country, not try to change our country and destroy our country. People who will fit in with our culture, people who fit in with our work ethic, people who come here to work, not bludge. So that's what we need to do. And those people have come. Immigrants have really helped our country. It's given us an enormous boost in the past. But now we've got too many people. We've got far too many people. Before the COVID mismanagement, we had about 250,000, 250,000 coming every year and staying. That was net migration. So what Pauline and I are saying is we need to cut that migration back to equal the number of people that are leaving. So in other words, if 70 or 100,000 leave, then 70 or 100,000 come in, no more. What they've been doing with mass migration, and the Labor Party is now talking about over 600,000, I think 650,000 in the next 2 years. That's 325,000 a year. What they're doing is they're suppressing wages. That's what they're doing. They're suppressing wages, which helps the multinationals that own 90% of Australia's large companies. They're driving up the price of housing. They're driving up the rental on houses. They're driving up the cost of housing. They're also destroying the services we have because they're now overloaded. So we need to stop immigration back to net zero immigration. In other words, we only have, that's it, Eddie, thank you, net zero immigration. We allow only the same number in that leave every year. And that way we can start getting some balance back into our lives, invest in infrastructure, and then, if necessary, continue with the immigration. So that's why we want net zero immigration, to give us a chance to catch up with our infrastructure, get us a chance to catch up with our housing. Jared says, middle class is disappearing. How do we bring back prosperity? Well, you know, the same answer. You've got to change who's in Parliament. We'd be much more effective if we had a few more Paulines and to join us, or myself, a few more to join me and Pauline in the Parliament. What made Australia great? Australia, 123 years ago, was the #1 country in the world for gross domestic product per capita. Per person, we had the highest income in the world, the highest income in the world. Within recent decades, we've had a report from the UN that said Australia has the most abundant resources in the world in terms of metals resources, minerals, energy. Look at our resources. Look at the sunshine we've got for growing our crops. Look at the wonderful soil we've got in pockets around the country. Large pockets, Darling Downs, Murray-Darling Basin, Atherton Tableland, the wheat fields of Western Australia, right through the Murray-Darling Basin across the states. We have got so much rich land. And you should see that the soil in the black soil plains up in the Flinders district of northern Queensland. Amazing. What we're lacking is infrastructure. So we've also got resources in terms of climate. We've also got resources in terms of water that are being mismanaged. And we've got a wonderful human resource that's being degraded because of the education in our schools is now not education, it's indoctrination. But nonetheless, we've got a very willing, productive, creative, innovative population that has got the basics in education, or used to have the basics in education. So what we need to do is to free those people up. Free them up. When people are free to think, free to exchange ideas, then we have a development of ideas, and then we have people matching those ideas to needs, and then you get development of products, development of services. Then you get more investment, you get more infrastructure. When you have a proper tax system, so when we talk about the sea transport that I visited on Wednesday morning, and putting up well, listen to this story. They're putting up proposals for mini ports in response to farmers, minerals producers wanting these ports so that they can get cheaper transport out of the country or between ports within the country, so they can reduce costs of food and have a better income from the food they produce. Everyone wins. The state government in this state of Queensland, the most diverse state in Australia, the state with the only decentralised state with more people outside this capital city than inside the capital city, have enormous advantages to be gained from, benefits hugely to be gained from mini ports up and down the coast. The state government wrote legislation, 640 pages of legislation, to stop this happening. Imagine if we had a port that could handle the crops coming out of the Flinders area in northern Queensland, which has amongst the most reliable rainfall in the Queensland, and I'm talking about inland. It has the most reliable river flows. I think the Flinders River is the most reliable in terms of regular in terms of river flow. It's only flows in the wet season, but it's very regular. So if we could use that water with the phenomenal soil they've got and the abundant sunshine and get that produce straight to the port on the Gulf Coast, then it goes straight to Asia. Look at the potential for an opportunity for markets in Asia. Huge markets. And they're wanting clean food, clean minerals, and Australia can produce them. Look at the Project Iron Boomerang that I introduced to the Parliament and is now in committee stage. We could build one railway line across the coast, across the country, open up services to, I need to tell you, also add a pipeline to bring water from the Argyle Dam, a huge body of water in Western Australia that's being underutilised. Electricity supply, optical fibre supply, and all the communities between Moranbah in the east in Queensland and Port Hedland in Western Australia would have electricity, would have optical fibre connections with the internet, water, and a rail connection. All the communities. Imagine what that would do to the lifestyles of the people living in the bush. Imagine what that would do to remote Aboriginal communities. It would open them up, give them transport to anywhere in Australia, cheapen their food costs, cheapen their medicine costs, cheapen transport. This is what we need. We need visionaries who have simple visions that produce startling results, like the Snowy Mountain Scheme. Yes, John Kowalski, build dams to stop floods and have water to put out fires and electricity. It's simple, isn't it? So what we need to do is fix the tax system. The tax system right now punishes families, punishes small Australian businesses, and rewards multinationals who come here, use our resources, exploit our resources, use our people, take for granted our education system, use our security forces, for example, to look after the Northwest Shelf gas wells, and then export it overseas with us getting bugger all for it. Build dams to stop the floods, build dams to save the water, exactly as you've just said. Put out fires and to produce electricity. The Bradfield scheme we're advocating in northern Queensland needs a power station or a hydro power station to go with it. That's part of our vision for northern Queensland. So it's all simple stuff. We need far less regulation. We need to get rid of the red tape, the green tape, which is the useless over-regulation of environmental aspects, which are based on shutting down things, not on protecting the environment. We need to get rid of blue tape, which is the UN tape that's controlling us. We also need to free up the land for the Aboriginals, because we need to make sure that the Aboriginals can have access to the land. Native title was an exercise that the whites in Australia thought, yeah, we've given Aboriginals their land. Rubbish. We have not given them their land. When you go to Cape York communities, right across the Cape, doesn't matter if you're black or white, ask people what's needed up there. It's access to the land. The Aboriginals cannot get land because the Aboriginal industry controls it. So that's more of what The Voice is about. The Voice is about instilling Aboriginal industry, the Aboriginal industry, black and white consultants, activists, politicians, agencies, bureaucrats, activists. These are the people that control the billions of dollars that we spend supposedly on the Aboriginals. Doesn't get, in large part, to the Aboriginal in the community. It gets hijacked at the Aboriginal industry, all the consultants I've just mentioned. Same with the resources, same with the water, same with the control of what people can and can't do. There it is again, it's all about control. Alana Sorensen says, Malcolm, what is the view of One Nation on looking after our environment? I understand progress and I am a no to climate change and The Voice, but I am still very concerned about our land and environment. I used to be a Greenie years ago. Well, I'm glad you said you used to be, because the Greens don't look after the environment. The Greens are poison to the environment. Alana, it's very, very simple what One Nation thinks about the environment. We are in favour of protecting our environment. We are also in favour of saying the environment and civilization are connected. If you don't have a civilization and efficient industry, you have more pollution. People who can't get their next feed for their children are going to crap in the creek, and they're going to foul the creek. They're going to use it as a sewer and as a septic. So that's what protecting civilization means. It protects the environment. And when we protect the environment, and for a future of civilization, we need to protect the environment. So protecting the environment looks after civilization. Protecting civilization looks after the environment. There are now, because of coal, there are now more whales alive than was the case 100 years ago. There are now more, because whales were caught and killed for getting whale oil. With the advent of coal and electricity, we don't need to kill and burn whales to produce lighting at night. With the advent of coal and oil and natural gas, we don't need to chop down trees for our heating in the wintertime and for our cooking. So the greatest saviour of whales and forests, without doubt, has been coal. Why? Because the energy density of coal is phenomenal. It's much better than wood. Nuclear, again, is even higher. So that's why the cost of coal-fired power station and nuclear-fired power station is less than wind and solar, because wind and solar use far too much resources to produce the same amount of power as a coal-fired power station does. For example, to produce a unit of electricity in a coal-fired power station takes about 35 tons of steel. To produce that same unit of energy from a wind turbine requires about 546 tons of steel. That's about 16 times as much, roughly, I think. But anyway, look at the 546 compared with 35. That's why wind and solar will never compete with coal and nuclear. It's time for the hour is up. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to get cut off here in about 20 seconds. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it's been of help to you, and I look forward to talking with you next week. And stay tuned for tonight. At 5 o'clock, we'll be releasing a third attempt to get my podcast with Clinton Fernandez up. I don't know what happened. It was released on Tuesday. It was released again yesterday. It'll be released again tonight. I don't know if someone's interfering with it, but Clinton Fernandez, Sub-Imperial Power, fabulous show. Have a listen to the man tonight at 5 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in.